Hello, you're at MRMW Berlin. We've got Rolfe Swinton with us from Reality Mine. Can you give us an introduction of yourself, Rolfe?
Hi, Van. Yes, Rolfe Swinton, co-founder of Reality Mine, based in New York. Reality Mine is a leader in mobile technology. We use data collection technologies to help people get very rich insights on consumer behavior. So
that's brilliant. And I know you talked to me a little bit in the pre-interview. We're actually here now. What are you looking forward to seeing?
Interesting. Already this morning, what's been most interesting to me is the fact that there's a mantra of the rate of change is only going to get faster. But in fact, I think people are profoundly right that recently I was looking at data at the rate of change of technologies that are impacting all of us, and we're not looking at linear growth, we look at exponential growth across all the technologies that are underpinning everything that's being presented. And so for that, I'm curious to see who really is understanding and applying that versus still saying that but actually applying things in a linear fashion.
And what are the top sort of talks or workshops you're really looking forward to that will be covering that? Have you got something planned? What you're going to be watching?
As I come to these always with a really open mind. Yeah. Who's going to have the most interesting things? Who's really sharing really fresh and interesting data? Obviously, it's interesting to see the likes of Facebook and what they're presenting with the scale of data they have with 1 billion people using their system. But what I think is interesting is that even so, they presented some data that was interesting. I think that what we're doing with Reality Mine, we're getting incredibly rich data, very specific data that gives people very specific context on people's daily lives and their behaviors, which I think is, personally, I think is as rich and robust as what I've seen from Facebook. So I feel excited about that in itself and sharing some of that with the audience later today.
What's the experience like coming to one of these conferences? If somebody's watching now, they haven't been, what's it like?
I think it's a great atmosphere. What's interesting is I've been now part of these since its very first thing, even sort of pre-MRMW, and just watching people grow to understand the importance of this. And at first people were thinking about, are we going to use mobile for market research? It was a real question.
Yeah.
And now it's like, okay, here are all the ways we're using this technology to do this. And so I think the people here, everyone is very focused. They have a specific thing they're trying to learn, which is an incredible change. And I think there's a lot of people with very specific agendas, very specific problems to solve, and are very open for sharing that. They want to get help, and they want to see who can help them figure out how to solve very complex and challenging problems, which no one has yet really solved. So it's a good group.
I did actually ask Pippa Bailey off the cuff, but you touched on that. Like maybe a few years ago, they were saying mobile is going to be the next big thing. It's going to be the next big thing. It's going to be the next big thing. What about wearable technology? How do you feel about that?
To me, this is just all the same bucket.
Same thing.
If you think about the rate of change in technology, we're now on an exponential curve, as I was saying before. And so if you just go back 20 or 30 years and look at some of the big technologies that are now ubiquitous. Think about the first digital camera is only about 28 years old. It then cost tens of thousands of dollars and it had less than a megapixel. Yeah. Now you can get a camera 1 billion times better and 1 billion times cheaper, quite literally. The same with sensors like location, motion sensors, GPS sensors, and the computing power altogether. What you can now get for $1,000 with the computing power on a new iPhone or an iPad is significantly faster than it ever has been anything before. So this rate of change, all that stuff available in one place. So wearables just become another dimension to that. A mobile device. It's not a mobile phone. It's mobile technology in the truest sense.
And so, I mean, if the rate is exponential, like you're saying, there's so much more technology there. The challenge then for someone who's conducting projects must be finding the right people to advise them on what to use or that kind of thing. How would you cross that sort of bridge? I
think there's two things. First, right now you take the stuff as you have it and think about how do I use the tools that are out there, right, and find the experts. But second, I think fundamentally, if you as your business are not thinking about how you are planning for this change, you have missed it. Because it is not a linear process, and so to plan your strategy, you have to be thinking further ahead because things are moving at such a rate now. The impact of that is non-trivial.
And is any of that planning done at these conferences? Is it something more you'd be sitting in like the back cave, like hatching? Where would you put your finger on the pulse if you're trying to anticipate where the change is going to come from?
I think when you look at what kinds of things people are presenting, you start to see some people pushing the boundaries of what's been done and the kind of questions being answered. You see across the board a big shift away from survey-based research into behavioral-based research. And I think those are the sorts of bellwethers you start to see where people are they're not asking questions anymore, they're not structuring samples, they're looking at behaviors, they're analyzing it and trying to see what patterns they get. You start to see some of these things where how is the nature of the research changing to start to draw out what those lines are and where things can go. So, I think it's happening here because the people who will make it happen are in and around here if they choose to actually make it happen, as opposed to just keep supporting what they've always been doing.
Okay, and I've got the whole sort of 2 days stretching ahead of me. Have you got any speeches or anything like that that you'd specifically mention for people to keep an eye out if they're at the conference now and they're going to be planning their...
That's a good question. I actually don't, but only because I try to I try to go and sit through absolutely as much as I possibly can and just see who's doing the best thing. So I certainly think people should come and listen in on ours because I think we're going to be sharing some very interesting data on looking at the total life context of sports fans around major sporting events in the U.S. And we chose that particular lens to look at things here because we thought it would give a very useful view about not just mobile behavior, but actually someone's total life behavior and what role second screens in that play into it, how emotional change affects their behavior, a lot of nuances around that, which we can look at using sports as a lens for, as an example for really what happens in everyone's everyday life, just a very useful way to look at that in total.
I think we mentioned before, but I'll ask you again, what were the differences between sports? Why would you pick, say, one over the other? Why basketball or baseball or cricket or...
Well, certainly what we saw, some of the very big patterns we see which are very interesting is context is everything. And we tend to forget about that sometimes in advertising because we haven't always had the data. But now we can start getting the data, the context of people's lives. And so you can understand where people are, who they're with, how they're feeling, what else they're doing. And that makes it very powerful to understand. So to go back to your question about what sporting event, well, actually, it depends on what are you trying to do, what are you trying to reach, how are you trying to engage people. And the kinds of sporting events have very different experiences. People who watch the World Cup, for example, extremely diverse audience. Not surprisingly, but as many women as men watching. And interestingly, often in a very social setting, which is very different than, say, people watching the Super Bowl, which tend to be at home, or March Madness watching on their own. So you think about if you were as an advertiser or marketer trying to reach these audiences, you have a very different kind of time and place to activate them.
So thanks very much for that, Rolfe. How, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, how would they do that? What would be the best way?
Best thing is they can always reach out to us through our Reality Mind website. So it's realitymind.com, and there's lots of more information about what we're up to there on the site. Some good white papers and data people can play with.
Yeah. And will you be up? What's the next conference you're planning to go to?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. We've got to actually. I know we'll be next one. We're speaking at CASRO. We'll be speaking at CASRO in Denver in a couple weeks, or I think even just next week. And hopefully we'll be at the next MRMW as well. So
well,
good.
Thanks very much for all your help, and appreciate you coming to do another interview with me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Ben.
Brilliant.
Cheers.
Thanks, Rolfe.